Number 1. John Leonard Orr. For years, John Leonard Orr was celebrated as a hero, the man who could read the language of flames. As a respected fire captain and arson investigator for the Glendale Fire Department in California, he had built a reputation for spotting patterns no one else could. But behind that calm authority was a man who wasn't just studying fire, he was creating it. He quickly became known for his sharp instincts. He taught seminars, trained new recruits, and published articles on arson prevention. To his colleagues, he was dedicated, even obsessed with understanding how and why fires started. But that obsession wasn't about stopping them. It was about the power of watching them burn. Between 1984 and 1991, Southern California was plagued by a wave of mysterious blazes. Fires erupted in stores, homes, and open fields, often spreading faster than investigators could explain. The damage, it's reached into the millions. Still, Orr always seemed to be nearby. He'd arrive early at fire scenes, offer theories before evidence was analyzed, and sometimes appear almost thrilled by the chaos. Then came the tragedy that would haunt California's firefighting community forever: the blaze at Ole's Home Center in South Pasadena, 1984. It tore through the building with terrifying speed, killing 4 people trapped inside. The cause? A small incendiary device made from simple household materials, one so clever that even veteran investigators struggled to trace it. The man leading that investigation was, ironically, the very person who had planted it. For years, Orr managed to hide in plain sight. He was part of the team investigating his own crimes. But by the late 1982, federal and local agencies began noticing a strange pattern. The same type of fire, with the same homemade device, seemed to follow one particular investigator's travel schedule. Whenever Orr attended a conference, a suspicious blaze would erupt nearby. In 1989, a joint task force began quietly tracking him. They placed small devices on his car, monitored his movements, and compared them against the growing map of arson sites. The pattern was undeniable. Then came the break: a fingerprint recovered from an incendiary device that matched Orr's. It was the first piece of hard evidence linking him directly to the fires. But the real twist came when investigators searched his home. Inside, they discovered a manuscript, a novel titled Points of Origin. It told the story of a fire investigator who secretly sets fires to prove his own theories. The plot mirrored the real-life crimes in disturbing detail, right down to the number of victims. Prosecutors would later describe the book as his written confession disguised as fiction. By 1991, the evidence was overwhelming. Orr was arrested and charged with multiple counts of arson and 4 counts of first-degree murder tied to the Collar patients. Ole's Home Center fire. In court, prosecutors portrayed him as a man driven by ego and fascination, someone who wanted to outsmart his peers, to be the first to arrive and the one with all the answers. The defense claimed there was no direct proof he started every fire, but jurors weren't convinced. In 1998, John Leonard Orr was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 4 consecutive life terms. Investigators later estimated he had set more than 2,000 fires over 7 years, a staggering number that destroyed homes, businesses, and lives. Today, Orr sits in a California state prison, where he continues to maintain partial innocence. His case has become a cautionary tale taught in fire investigation courses nationwide, a story of how obsession can twist into destruction. The man once trusted to solve the mystery of fire became its greatest threat. And when the truth finally emerged, it revealed not just a criminal, but a patient, chilling paradox: the firefighter who couldn't stop lighting the match. Number 2. Paul Kenneth Keller. When the fires began spreading across Washington state in 1992, investigators were baffled. Churches, retirement homes, warehouses, and schools were burning in rapid succession, often within hours of each other. The pattern felt deliberate, almost strategic. But no one could have imagined that behind this calculated destruction, stood a man who once dreamed of fighting fires, himself a volunteer firefighter named Paul Kenneth Keller. Keller came from what many saw as an ordinary, stable background. Born in 1966 and raised in Linwood, Washington, he grew up in a religious Lutheran family. His father owned an advertising business, and Paul was known as bright, friendly, and articulate. Yet, beneath that surface, his personality was fractured, burdened by feelings of inadequacy and a growing fascination with flames. He briefly volunteered at a local fire department, an experience that fed both his ego and his obsession. The power and adrenaline of fire would soon become his escape from frustration and failure. By the fall of 1992, the Seattle and Tacoma regions were under siege. Dozens of fires erupted, sometimes several in one night. Many were set in the early hours of the morning, using gasoline or kerosene to ensure maximum destruction. Some of the first targets were businesses and schools, but as weeks passed, the arsonists began attacking occupied buildings. In January 1993, a horrific fire tore through a retirement home in Everett, killing 3 elderly residents. It was the turning point. What had been treated as serial vandalism now became a full-scale manhunt for a killer. Keller's fires were spreading terror. News stations began running nightly updates. Fire investigators, ATF agents, and local police formed a joint task force, desperate to stop the arsonist before more people died. Witnesses began describing a suspicious vehicle, a light-colored sedan, often seen near the ignition points. A composite sketch soon followed, showing a clean-cut man with sandy hair and glasses. It wasn't much, but it was enough to narrow the search. Meanwhile, Keller couldn't resist inserting himself into the chaos. He called radio stations to discuss the fires and even reached out to investigators, pretending to offer insight. His arrogance grew, and so did his mistakes. Investigators found surveillance footage of a man buying large quantities of accelerants from local stores. The description and the car matched the mysterious figure seen near several fire scenes. Then came the final link, a call to the police from Keller's own father. Keller's father had begun to suspect something terrible. His son had been out at odd hours, nervously following news reports about the fires and speaking about them with disturbing excitement. When the composite sketch aired, the resemblance was undeniable. Torn between loyalty and conscience, he contacted detectives and said he feared his son might be responsible. In February 1993, police moved in. They trailed Keller's car and collected physical evidence tying him to multiple ignition sites. When confronted, he quickly confessed calmly, admitting to setting more than 100 fires across western Washington. Investigators later confirmed that number, 107 separate blazes, causing over $30 million in property damage and 3 deaths. Keller's explanation was chilling in its simplicity. He said he couldn't stop himself. In court, prosecutors called him one of the most prolific arsonists in American history. They detailed how he had targeted vulnerable locations, churches, retirement homes, and places that symbolized community simply to satisfy his urges. The defense cited his mental instability and obsession with fire, but the scale of destruction left little room for leniency. In 1993, Paul Kenneth Keller was convicted and sentenced to 107 years in prison, 1 year for each fire he admitted to setting. The sentence ensured he would never walk free again. Even today, his case remains a textbook example of how methodical and intelligent arsonists can hide in plain sight. The man who once volunteered to protect his community ended up terrorizing it, instead transforming Washington's nights into a map of burning chaos. And as one investigator later said, he wasn't fighting fires anymore, he was feeding them. Number 3. Thomas Sweat. For 3 decades, the Washington, D.C. area lived under a quiet terror that no one could see coming. Fires erupted in cars, homes, and apartment buildings, hundreds of them, leaving behind destruction that seemed random, almost impossible to connect. But every one of those fires traced back to a single man who blended into the crowd, a man obsessed with flame and fantasy. His name was Thomas Sweat. Sweat's story begins in the 1970 seconds. Born and raised in Southeast Washington, D.C., he lived an unremarkable life on the surface. He worked at fast food restaurants, lived alone, and had no criminal record to speak of. But beneath that calm exterior was a hidden world, one consumed by isolation, obsession, and control. He was fascinated by firefighters, especially their uniforms and the power they represented. He wasn't one of them, but he wanted to be close watching them, admiring them, sometimes even following them to fire scenes. Then he began creating those scenes himself. His first known arsons were small abandoned cars, trash bins, and alleyway fires that burned out quickly. But as years passed, the scale grew. He learned how to build simple ignition devices, often using a cigarette, a match, and a small container of gasoline. The delay gave him time to walk away before the flames erupted. The fires began spreading across Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, hundreds of them over the span of 30 years. Investigators knew they were dealing with a serial arsonist, but they had no suspect and no clear motive. The attacks seemed too random to be the work of one person. Then came a series of deadly blazes in the early 2000s that changed everything. In 2003, a house fire in Northeast D.C. killed 2 residents. The accelerant used was familiar, the same pattern seen in countless earlier fires. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, launched one of the largest arson investigations in American history. Agents created a special task force and began mapping the incidents. That's when the pattern emerged. The ignition points often clustered near certain neighborhoods, gas stations, and routes connected to one part of the city. They discovered a consistent method, the same fuel type, the same device, and cigarette butts left nearby. It was those discarded cigarettes that finally broke the case. In 2005, forensic analysts matched DNA from one of the cigarette butts to a man already in a federal database, Thomas Sweat. Surveillance soon confirmed the match. Investigators followed him as he traveled through the city, sometimes carrying small plastic containers and lighters. When confronted, Sweat didn't deny it. He quietly admitted to setting more than 350 fires over the previous 30 years. His confession shocked even the most seasoned agents. During interviews, he described his methods with chilling precision. He would spot someone who caught his attention, often a man he found appealing, and later set a fire near that person's home or workplace. He admitted that his arsons were deeply personal to him, describing them as emotional reactions rather than calculated attacks. It was a psychological compulsion, one that had spiraled completely out of his control. The scope of his crimes was staggering. Sweat's fires caused millions in damage, displaced countless families, and killed 2 people. ATF investigators called him the most prolific serial arsonist in American history. In October 2005, Thomas Sweat pleaded guilty to multiple counts of arson, resulting in death, and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, federal prosecutors emphasized the sheer longevity of his crimes: 3 decades of destruction, hundreds of fires, and a city living in fear without knowing why. Today, Sweat serves his sentence in a federal penitentiary, where he occasionally writes letters describing his thoughts and motivations. His words remain as disturbing as his actions: methodical, detached, and void of empathy. The Sweat case remains one of the most extensive arson investigations ever undertaken in the United States. It's a story that shows how obsession, when left unchecked, can burn through decades and lives alike. He wanted to be near firefighters, to feel their power and purpose. Instead, he became the reason they never stopped running. Number 4. Raymond Lee Oyler Inn. October 2006, the skies over Southern California turned orange. A fire was tearing through the San Jacinto Mountains near Cabazon, a wall of heat so fierce that entire ridgelines vanished behind it. 5 firefighters from Engine 57 were trapped on a slope, surrounded by flames that moved faster than they could escape. It would become one of the deadliest wildfires in modern California history, and the man responsible wasn't a stranger to the fire line, he was one of their own. His name was Raymond Lee Oyler. Oyler's life didn't begin in chaos. Born in 1971, he grew up in Riverside County and worked various jobs before becoming a seasonal mechanic and part-time firefighter. Friends described him as quiet but proud of his involvement with the fire service. He admired firefighters and spoke often about wanting to prove himself. But behind that admiration was something darker, an obsession with starting fires instead of putting them out. By 2006, Riverside County was seeing an unusual pattern of wildfires, small suspicious burns that appeared along remote mountain roads. The ignition devices were crude but consistent. A cigarette connected to matches, sometimes stabilized by a rubber band to create a delayed flame. Investigators began calling them signature fires because they all looked the same. Over several months, at least 20 of them were traced to the same hand. Then came the 26th of October, 2006, the day of the Esperanza fire. The blaze erupted on a windy morning and quickly expanded, fueled by dry brush and 40-mile-per-hour gusts. As crews battled to protect nearby homes, one engine crew, Engine 57, became overrun. 5 firefighters were caught as the flames roared uphill, engulfing their truck and leaving no time to retreat. The loss devastated the firefighting community, but from the beginning, investigators suspected the fire wasn't natural. Within days, arson specialists from CAL FIRE and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives arrived on scene. The ignition point was located near a roadside turnout, and there, they found the same type of device seen in earlier cases. Surveillance footage from local stores showed a man matching Oyler's description buying the same brand of cigarettes, matches, and rubber bands used in the fires. Tire impressions at the scene matched Oyler's car. When investigators confronted him, Oyler denied any involvement. But his story began to unravel quickly. They recovered more homemade incendiary devices from his vehicle, along with receipts linking him to the purchases. Witnesses had seen his car in the area around multiple fire starts. The evidence, piece by piece, formed a damning picture this wasn't coincidence. It was a calculated pattern. Prosecutors argued that Oyler set the Esperanza fire deliberately, knowing that conditions would make it explosive. They portrayed him as a man desperate for recognition, someone who wanted to feel powerful by creating the very chaos firefighters struggled to control. The defense countered that the evidence was circumstantial and that others could have planted the devices, but the physical trail was overwhelming. In March 2009, after weeks of testimony, the jury convicted Raymond Lee Oyler on 5 counts of first-degree murder, along with 37 counts of arson. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Jurors later said the image of those 5 firefighters men who had gone to save lives and never returned was impossible to ignore. Oyler was sentenced to death, becoming one of the few arsonists in U.S. history to receive that penalty. He remains on death row in San Quentin State Prison, where he continues to appeal his case. The Esperanza fire burned more than 40,000 acres, destroyed 34 homes, and left an emotional scar on the entire state. For firefighters across America, it was a brutal reminder that the greatest danger doesn't always come from nature sometimes, it comes from within their own ranks. Raymond Oyler wanted to be part of the firefighting brotherhood. Instead, his actions destroyed it, and 5 men paid the price for his need to watch the world burn. Number 5. Jonathan Quiles. In late November 2024, a quiet night in Medford, New York, turned into chaos. Flames erupted from a patch of brush near a parking lot, spreading toward parked cars and nearby businesses. Within minutes, volunteer firefighters arrived on scene, but among the responders was the man who had started it. His name was Jonathan Quiles, a volunteer firefighter accused of setting the very fire he was called to fight. At just 27 years old, Quiles had been a member of the Medford Fire Department on Long Island, serving as a volunteer and aspiring to join the ranks full-time. Those who knew him described him as confident, sometimes a little too eager for attention, but genuinely devoted to the firehouse. He posted photos of perfects, himself in uniform, attended community events, and took pride in the image of public service. Yet beneath that image, investigators say, was a dangerous craving for excitement, one that led him to betray the very duty he swore to uphold. On the night of the 17th of November 2024, multiple witnesses reported seeing a man crouch near a patch of dry brush, tossing small flaming objects into the grass. Within seconds, flames flared up, fanned by the wind, and began spreading. One witness shouted, another dialed 911, and a passing driver captured video showing a vehicle leaving the scene just as the fire took hold. By the time firefighters arrived, one car had already sustained damage. What no one expected was that the man allegedly responsible was one of their own. Investigators from the Suffolk County Police Department quickly began piecing together what happened. The first break came from eyewitness testimony. 4 separate witnesses described a man throwing lit cotton balls, and all provided a similar description of his vehicle. When surveillance footage from nearby buildings was reviewed, it showed the same car in the area at the time of ignition. One of the responding officers recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Jonathan Quiles. Within hours, detectives brought him in for questioning. According to reports, Quiles denied starting the fire, but the combination of surveillance footage, eyewitness statements, and his proximity to the scene painted a different story. Prosecutors later revealed that the cotton balls had been soaked in a flammable substance, a simple but effective way to start a brush fire with minimal effort. The case stunned the Medford community. The fire department released a statement distancing itself from Quiles, emphasizing that his actions did not represent the values of the service. Local media outlets, including ABC News, CBS, NBC, and several New York papers, ran photos of him leaving court in his uniform jacket, a symbol that now represented betrayal instead of honor. Quiles was charged with third-degree arson and reckless endangerment. Despite the seriousness of the allegations, he was released without bail pending trial, a decision that sparked debate among residents who watched firefighters risk their lives that same night to contain the flames he allegedly set. The investigation continued into early 2025, with prosecutors building their case around video evidence, witness statements, and his vehicle's confirmed presence at the scene. Authorities noted that no one was injured, but the potential for disaster was enormous. The fire had started near vehicles and businesses, and with different wind conditions, it could have spread far faster. As of now, the case remains ongoing. Quiles faces the possibility of years in prison if convicted, though he continues to maintain his innocence. The footage and testimony, however, tell a damning story, one of a man who may have created danger, just to feel the rush of stopping it. In the end, the Medford fire was extinguished quickly, but its aftermath still burns in the minds of those who trusted him. A firefighter's duty is to protect life and property, to face danger, not cause it. And for Jonathan Quiles, that single night turned a badge of honor into a mark of shame, one careless spark at a time. Number 6. Alvin Cox and Adrian Strickland. In 2025, the Atlanta Fire Department found itself at the center of a scandal that stunned both colleagues and the public. Two of its own, a firefighter and his captain, were arrested for setting fire not to a stranger's property, but to one of their own vehicles, all in an alleged attempt to collect insurance money. The suspects were 3-year-old firefighter Alvin Cox and Captain Adrian Strickland, a respected veteran of the department. On paper, the two men couldn't have been more different in rank, but they shared a bond built in the firehouse, long shifts, dangerous calls, and the mutual trust that comes with facing risk together. Yet that trust would soon turn into conspiracy. Prosecutors say what began as a plan to solve a financial problem ended with both men in handcuffs, accused of betraying the badge. The story begins in April 2023, when a car belonging to firefighter Alvin Cox mysteriously caught fire late at night in DeKalb County, Georgia. Investigators from the local fire marshal's office initially treated it as an accident, a routine vehicle fire, but something didn't add up. The car was parked in an isolated area, and the pattern of damage suggested accelerants. When insurance records showed that Cox filed a claim shortly after, suspicions deepened. For more than a year, the case remained quiet. Then, in 2025, a new investigation by the Georgia Office of the Insurance and Safety Fire Commissioner uncovered critical evidence. Cell phone data showing that both Cox and Captain Strickland were at the location of the fire, around the time it started. Even more damning, Strickland's department-issued device had accessed the internal incident report 14 separate times, long after the case was supposedly closed. When investigators pulled surveillance footage from nearby cameras, it placed the same two men's vehicles in the area shortly before the blaze. What had once seemed like a coincidence began to look like collusion. The data trail cell pings, report logs, and digital footprints painted a story too precise to ignore. In June 2025, both Cox and Strickland were arrested and charged with arson and insurance fraud. The news broke fast across Atlanta. Fox 5, 1 Alive, and WSB Radio all ran segments showing the pair being led into court. The images were surreal. Firefighters in dress uniforms 1 month, defendants in handcuffs the next. For the Atlanta Fire Department, the fallout was immediate. Officials expressed deep disappointment, calling the case a betrayal of public trust. Both men were suspended, pending the outcome of the trial. Prosecutors alleged that Strickland, as a captain, used his authority to manipulate the department's reporting system, accessing and reviewing the incident data 14 times to monitor whether investigators were getting close. It was a level of insider interference rarely seen in public safety crimes. In court documents, investigators described a clear motive: financial desperation. Cox's car was older, underinsured, and had little resale value. By burning it, prosecutors say, the men hoped to claim a total loss payout from his insurance company. But their plan unraveled as soon as forensic data revealed the truth. The timing, the movements, and the repeated digital tampering tied everything back to them. As of late 2025, the case remains ongoing, with both defendants awaiting trial. They face multiple felony counts, including arson, insurance fraud, and abuse of public office. If convicted, each could face years in prison and the permanent loss of their firefighting credentials. The irony is impossible to miss. Firefighters are trained to read the language of flame to spot patterns, to know how fires start and spread. But in this case, their own expertise became their downfall. Every decision they made to hide their crime left behind a digital trace, every keystroke, every access, every movement recorded. What began as a simple plan to burn a car for cash exposed a deeper rot: the collapse of integrity from those sworn to protect it. Alvin Cox and Adrian Strickland once stood for duty, courage, and public service. Now, they stand accused of turning that honor into a criminal enterprise, proof that even in the firehouse, trust can burn. Number 7. Zane Wallace Peterson. In September 2013, the hills of Shasta County, California, lit up with a fury that locals would never forget. Winds howled through the canyons, smoke thickened the sky, and an 8,000-acre inferno known as the Clover Fire tore across communities, destroying hundreds of homes and claiming one life. Firefighters battled day and night to contain it. But what none of them knew was that the man behind the flames had once stood beside them on the fire line. His name was Zane Wallace Peterson. Peterson was a familiar face in California's wildfire country. For 7 years, he worked as a firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service in the Mendocino National Forest, someone trained to protect lives, land, and property. Colleagues described him as capable, physically strong, and deeply experienced in fire behavior. Yet, after leaving the service, something in him changed. He drifted between jobs, struggled financially, and grew resentful toward what he saw as a system that had overlooked him. That resentment, prosecutors later argued, became the spark that ignited his crimes. By late summer 2013, Northern California was already dry and vulnerable. Fires had been popping up across Shasta County small, at first, but strangely frequent and often set along rural roads. Fire investigators began noticing a pattern. Each blaze appeared to have been deliberately lit with waterproof matches placed in dry grass or roadside brush. The pattern was so consistent that investigators started referring to them as the signature fires. Then came the Clover Fire on the 9th of September 2013. It began in the early afternoon near Clover Road, just south of Redding. Within hours, strong winds drove it through canyons and neighborhoods, consuming everything in its path. More than 60 structures were destroyed in a single day. One resident, 56-year-old Brian Henry, was unable to escape the flames and died at the scene. The fire's rapid spread baffled investigators until they discovered evidence that confirmed their worst fears. It had been deliberately set. Detectives from the Shasta County Sheriff's Office and CAL FIRE worked together to find who was responsible. The breakthrough came when surveillance footage from a local security camera showed a truck driving past multiple ignition points minutes before the fires began. The make, model, and distinctive damage to the truck's body led investigators directly to Peterson. When they searched his vehicle and home, they found waterproof matches identical to those used at the fire sites. The evidence grew stronger. Witnesses had seen Peterson's truck in remote areas where several smaller fires had started in the weeks before the Clover blaze. GPS data and cell records placed him at or near those ignition sites. The pattern was undeniable. He wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was there because he wanted to be. When arrested, Peterson initially denied everything, but his story changed under questioning, shifting from coincidence to partial admissions. Prosecutors charged him with over 200 counts of arson, including murder for the death caused by the Clover Fire. During trial, they portrayed him as a former firefighter who used his insider knowledge to create fires that would be difficult to trace fires, designed to burn fast and look accidental. They pointed to his choice of waterproof matches, a detail only a trained firefighter would think to use in outdoor conditions. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Peterson had been unfairly targeted because of his background. But the combination of surveillance footage, witness statements, and physical evidence left the jury little doubt. In 2013, he was convicted on more than 200 counts of arson and 1 count of second-degree murder. The sentence was severe 25 years to life, plus an additional 90 years for the arson charges. The judge described his crimes as a betrayal of public trust and a direct assault on the very people he once served alongside. Today, Peterson remains in state prison, serving what is effectively a life sentence. The Clover Fire scarred the land for years afterward, its burned trees still visible along the ridges near Igo and Happy Valley. For those who fought the blaze, the hardest part wasn't just the loss of homes or even the death it caused. It was knowing that one of their own had done it intentionally. Zane Peterson once used his skill to fight wildfires and save lives. But when that same knowledge was turned against the people of Shasta County, it proved devastating. He understood how to stop a fire, and that's exactly why his decision to start one cut so deep. Number 8. David Plant. In April 2016, the small New Hampshire town of Stoddard faced a terrifying reality. Wildfires were sweeping across rural hillsides, threatening homes, livestock, and families who had never imagined danger would come so close. Smoke rolled through the forests, blanketing the sky, while volunteer firefighters raced from one blaze to the next. What no one suspected was that one of those firefighters was secretly responsible for the very destruction he was helping to fight. His name was David Plant. Plant wasn't a stranger to the tight-knit world of rural firefighting. He served as a volunteer with the Stoddard Fire Department, known among neighbors as a helpful, even cheerful man. He often showed up first to respond to emergencies and seemed deeply invested in the department's work. But behind that enthusiasm lay something darker, a craving for recognition, a desire to be seen as the hero. It wasn't enough to fight fires. He wanted to create the emergency that would make him look like one. On the 23rd of April 2016, the first blaze began on a windy afternoon near Route 9. It burned through more than 100 acres of brush and forest, forcing evacuations from nearby homes as the fire advanced toward the Stoddard town line. Firefighters from across New Hampshire joined the effort, working for hours to contain it. The next day, a second fire erupted just miles away in an area that had already been scorched. The fires spread rapidly, destroying more than 190 acres and causing an estimated $500,000 in damage. At least 17 homes had to be evacuated. For a small town, it was chaos. Investigators from the New Hampshire Division of Forests and Lands began searching for a cause. What they found was odd. Both fires appeared to have been started deliberately, one with a flint-style lighter, and the other using sunlight concentrated through a glass bottle, a primitive but surprisingly effective ignition method. Evidence suggested that whoever set them had an understanding of fire behavior and terrain. Suspicion quickly turned inward, towards someone who would have that kind of knowledge. Witnesses soon came forward, saying they had seen firefighter David Plant near both fire origins before the flames spread. One even recalled him asking fellow firefighters to take his photo in front of the burning landscape, a gesture that felt strange even in the heat of crisis. When questioned, Plant denied involvement, but inconsistencies in his story kept investigators digging. He agreed to take a polygraph test, which he ultimately failed. Confronted with the results, he finally confessed, admitting that he had started both fires. According to court documents, Plant explained his methods in detail. One blaze, he said, had been set by positioning a glass bottle to magnify sunlight onto dry leaves. The other, he lit using a flint lighter. His motive wasn't revenge or profit, it was attention. He wanted to be recognized for his work, to look like the firefighter who saved the day. Investigators described it as a classic case of hero syndrome, the psychological desire to cause a problem so one can appear heroic by solving it. When news of his arrest broke, the town of Stoddard was stunned. Local headlines painted a painful picture. The same man who had posed in front of the flames had caused them. In October 2016, Plant pleaded guilty to multiple counts of arson and was sentenced to 2 and a Stydian stack, half to 7 years in prison, along with more than $650,000 in restitution. During sentencing, the judge called his actions a betrayal of community trust and emphasized the danger he had created for both residents and fellow firefighters. In the months that followed, reports from WMUR News 9, the Union Leader, and the Keene Sentinel documented the fallout. The Stoddard Fire Department issued a statement expressing heartbreak and disbelief. For them, it wasn't just a crime, it was personal. They had fought beside Plant, shared meals in the firehouse, trusted him with their safety, and then discovered he had put them all at risk for his own ego. Today, David Plant's name serves as a cautionary example in training programs across New England. His case is discussed not just for the fires he set, but for the psychology behind them, how the desire for praise can twist into destruction. He wanted to be admired for saving lives. Instead, he endangered them, turning a badge of honor into a symbol of deceit. Number 9. Matthew Jurado. In the summer of 2016, the city of North Tonawanda, New York, was rocked by a fire that wasn't just destructive, it was personal. Flames engulfed the home of Kenneth Walker, the city's only black firefighter, displacing his family and killing their 2 cats. At first, it looked like a cruel act of hate, especially since Walker had received an anonymous racist letter days before the blaze. But when investigators uncovered the truth, it turned out to be something even more twisted: revenge from a former firefighter who once worked alongside him. That man was Matthew Jurado. Jurado had been a volunteer with the Live Hose Fire Company, a department with a long history of community service. He was young, eager, and proud of his uniform. But beneath that pride was a growing bitterness. Weeks before the incident, Jurado had been expelled from the department for misconduct. The dismissal hit him hard. Friends said he felt humiliated, stripped of the sense of belonging and respect he craved. Instead of moving on, that resentment began to fester. On the night of the 3rd of August 2016, North Tonawanda police and firefighters were called to a devastating scene. Walker's home was in flames. Thick smoke billowed from the structure as firefighters worked desperately to contain it. Though no one was injured, the family lost nearly everything inside, including their pets. The timing was suspicious. Just 3 days earlier, Kenneth Walker had found a threatening letter in his mailbox. It warned him to resign by the end of the week and was signed with the initials KKK. The community, shaken and angry, believed the fire was racially motivated. The incident made national headlines, and donations poured in through a GoFundMe campaign that eventually raised more than $140,000 to help the family rebuild. But investigators soon discovered that the motive wasn't hate, it was vengeance. Detectives began retracing the timeline, interviewing people close to both Walker and the fire department. One lead came from Jurado's girlfriend, who placed a 911 call the night of the fire, a call that contradicted Jurado's earlier story about his whereabouts. When questioned, he grew nervous, his explanations shifting with each interview. Eventually, faced with mounting evidence, he broke. According to police records, Jurado sighed and said, "Okay, I'll tell you the truth." He confessed to setting the fire, explaining that it had nothing to do with the racist letter. He claimed he targeted Walker's home simply because he was angry at being expelled from the same department. Investigators later found a bottle of lighter fluid in his possession, matching the accelerant used at the scene. The revelation stunned the city. What had been feared as a hate crime turned out to be a petty act of retaliation, one that destroyed an innocent family's home. Niagara County prosecutors charged Jurado with arson and burglary. During court proceedings, the details became clear. Jurado had waited until the middle of the night, poured lighter fluid on the porch, and ignited it before fleeing. His confession, recorded and verified, left little room for doubt. In July 2017, Jurado pleaded guilty to second-degree arson and was sentenced to 10 years in state prison. During sentencing, the judge described his actions as an attack on the very community he once claimed to serve. Kenneth Walker, addressing the court, said he forgave Jurado, but emphasized the pain his family endured, the loss of their pets, their home, and their sense of safety. Media coverage was extensive. The Buffalo News published photos of Jurado being led from the police station, his head lowered, surrounded by officers. WGRZ-TV, WBFO Radio, and the Niagara Gazette all reported on the sentencing, noting the irony of a firefighter destroying the home of one of his own. Jurado remains behind bars, serving out his sentence. The case continues to stand as a lesson in how resentment and pride can spiral into destruction. He set out to get even, to make a statement against those he felt had wronged him, but instead, he became the face of betrayal in a profession built on trust. Matthew Jurado wanted attention and revenge. What he got was infamy and the permanent stain of a firefighter who chose to burn instead of save. Number 10. David Matthew Neat. In the rugged hills outside Alpine, Texas, wildfires had become so frequent that residents began to wonder if nature itself had turned against them. Between late 2022 and mid-2024, more than 20 brush fires erupted across Brewster County remote. Fast-moving blazes that often appeared in the same kinds of places: empty fields, rural roadsides, and canyons just outside town. For months, investigators chased theories about lightning strikes and careless campers. But the truth was far more disturbing. The person behind the fires wasn't a stranger to Alpine's emergency crews. He was one of them, volunteer firefighter and EMS crew member, David Matthew Neat. Neat had joined the Alpine Volunteer Fire Department to serve his community. Locals knew him as reliable, always first on scene, eager to help. He had some experience in emergency response and took pride in the work, running toward danger when others ran away. Yet, as investigators would later allege, That same desire to be needed slowly transformed into something darker. The attention, the adrenaline, and the praise he received after each call became addictive. When the siren stopped, he found himself wanting that rush again. Beginning in early 2023, small fires started cropping up across the desert landscape surrounding Alpine. At first, no one connected them. A brush fire here, another the following week, harmless enough on their own. But by the end of that year, the pattern was undeniable. Each blaze seemed to occur on days when Neat was off-duty but still in the area. The ignition points were often along rural roads, accessible only to locals who knew the terrain well. By spring 2024, the Texas A&M Forest Service and the Brewster County Sheriff's Office had launched a joint investigation. Fire experts examined the debris from multiple scenes and found homemade incendiary devices, crude but clever tools designed for delayed ignition. These allowed the arsonist to light the fuse and leave the area minutes before the flames appeared. It was a level of planning that suggested training, not chance. Detectives soon noticed that one volunteer firefighter always seemed to be nearby when the calls came in. To confirm their suspicions, they turned to data. Cell tower records revealed that Neat's phone pinged near many of the ignition sites within minutes of each fire's start. DNA testing of materials recovered from several devices, including burnt tape and a discarded match casing, produced a genetic match to him. When search warrants were executed in July 2024, investigators discovered additional incendiary components in his possession, the same type used to start the earlier blazes. Confronted with the evidence, Neat was arrested and charged with 20 counts of felony arson. He was booked into the Brewster County Jail on a $300,000 bond, where he remains pending trial. Officials from the Texas A&M Forest Service issued a public statement calling the case one of the most significant firefighter-related arson investigations in the state's history. Coverage from Fox 26 Houston, KXAN, Austin, and News Nation spread quickly, labeling Neat a serial arsonist in uniform. Prosecutors allege that over an 18-month period, Neat deliberately set more than 20 fires across West Texas, endangering lives and destroying acres of ranch land. Each blaze required multiple agencies to contain volunteer crews, Forest Service teams, and county firefighters, all risking themselves to stop disasters allegedly caused by one of their own. The investigation's findings shook Alpine's small fire community. Volunteers who had once trusted Neat felt betrayed. The same man who had shared late-night shifts and rescue calls with them was now accused of turning their courage into a cover for destruction. Local residents expressed outrage and disbelief, with one sheriff's deputy calling it the ultimate betrayal of public trust. As of late 2025, the case is still working its way through Texas courts. If convicted, Neat could face decades in prison. Prosecutors are expected to rely heavily on forensic DNA, cell data analysis, and the recovered incendiary devices evidence that paints a detailed picture of a calculated campaign of arson. For Alpine, the scars remain charred soil along the highway, blackened fence lines, and the lingering question of how a firefighter could turn against the very mission he swore to uphold. David Matthew Neat once answered calls for help. Now, he sits behind bars, accused of creating the very emergencies he used to rush toward. He wanted to be the hero who stopped the fires until he became the reason they never stopped burning.